He thought she was running late from Bible study, maybe traffic, maybe she stopped to grab groceries. The kind of thoughts that cross your mind when you trust someone with everything you have. But when he pulled into that Walmart parking lot at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in March and saw her car tucked away in the back corner, engine running, windows fogged up, something inside him already knew. And what he found in those next 60 seconds would destroy 3 families, shock an entire town, and leave investigators asking one haunting question: at what point does a good man become capable of the unthinkable? This is the story of David, Rebecca, and Pastor Collins. A story of faith, devotion, and a betrayal so deep it ended in gunfire behind a superstore in suburban Georgia. But here's what makes this case different. This wasn't a crime of calculation. It wasn't planned. And according to the evidence found later, David almost walked away. Almost. The question that still haunts everyone who knew them is simple but impossible to answer. What happens in those final seconds before everything you've built just ends? Was it a moment of blind rage, the kind that overtakes you before your brain can catch up? Or had something been building for weeks, months even, festering beneath the surface of Sunday dinners and morning prayers? Did David suspect? Did he follow her that night? Or was it just the worst timing imaginable? And here's what kept investigators up at night. The affair had actually ended. Rebecca had broken it off 2 months before that March evening. The pastor had moved on, recommitted to his family, returned to being the spiritual leader everyone believed him to be. So why were they there together that night, parked in the shadows behind a Walmart, in a place they'd once used for secret meetings? The answers, when they finally came together, painted a picture far more complicated than anyone expected. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about control, about identity, about what happens when the person you've built your entire world around becomes someone you don't recognize anymore. And the most chilling detail of all? Security footage would later show that David stood outside that car for 22 full seconds before he acted. 22 seconds where 3 people were still alive. 22 seconds where everything could have gone differently. David Patterson was the kind of man people described with words like steady, reliable, the backbone of the community. At 48, he'd spent 26 years in construction, building homes across 3 counties, and he wore his work boots to church every Sunday because he usually came straight from a job site. He'd met Rebecca at a church barbecue back in 1998, and everyone who was there that day remembers how he couldn't take his eyes off her. She was volunteering at the grill, hair pulled back, laughing at something someone said, and David later told his best friend that he knew right then he'd found the woman he'd spent his life with. They married 10 months later in a small ceremony at Riverside Baptist Church, the same church where 24 years later everything would unravel. Rebecca was 45, a second-grade teacher at Oakwood Elementary, and on Sundays she taught the children's class where kids learned Bible stories through crafts and songs. Parents loved her. She remembered every child's name, knew which one struggled at home, always had encouraging words and an extra snack in her bag for anyone who needed it. The Pattersons didn't have children of their own, something that had caused Rebecca deep pain in their early years together, but they'd made peace with it and poured that energy into their community instead. They were the couple that hosted Thanksgiving for anyone who had nowhere else to go. David fixed neighbors' porches for free. Rebecca organized the church food drive every Christmas. If you'd asked anyone in their town of Maplewood, Georgia, population 8,400, to name a couple that had it figured out, the Pattersons would have been near the top of that list. Pastor Marcus Collins had led Riverside Baptist for 7 years. He was 52, married to his college sweetheart Jennifer, father to 3 grown children who'd all moved out of state for work. He had that rare gift of making every sermon feel personal, like he was speaking directly to whatever you were struggling with that week. Attendance had grown steadily under his leadership. The church had expanded, added a youth center, started a community outreach program that fed 40 families every month. Marcus was the kind of pastor who showed up at the hospital at midnight when someone got bad news, who officiated weddings and funerals with equal care, who genuinely seemed to love the calling he'd devoted his life to. David served as a deacon under Pastor Collins. They'd worked together on building projects, spent hours planning church events, developed what everyone assumed was a real friendship. Rebecca sang in the choir and helped organize women's ministry events. From the outside, it looked like 3 people completely aligned in purpose and faith. But something had shifted about 18 months before that March night. Rebecca had started staying later at church, extra choir practice, planning meetings for the women's retreat, Bible study groups that seemed to run longer each week. David didn't question it at first because that was who Rebecca was, always giving, always involved. But by the fall, he'd noticed she was different when she came home, distracted, her phone always face down on the counter. She'd started taking showers as soon as she walked in the door, saying she felt dusty from the church's old building, but it was a new habit that hadn't existed before. The first real crack in David's trust came on a Thursday in November. He'd left work early because a storm was rolling in, and the crew couldn't pour concrete in the rain. When he got home at 3 in the afternoon, Rebecca's car was gone even though she'd said she had the day off. He called her cell. No answer. He tried again an hour later. Still nothing. She finally came through the door at 6:30, apologized, said she'd driven to Atlanta to visit a college friend, and her phone had died. The story was plausible enough, but David had noticed something. A new perfume. Not the one he'd bought her for their anniversary. Something floral and expensive. When he asked about it, she said Jennifer Collins had given it to her, trying out new products for the church gift bazaar. Again, plausible. But the explanation came too quickly, too smoothly. By December, David was paying attention in ways he never had before. He noticed that Rebecca texted constantly during dinner, that she'd started going to the gym 3 times a week when she'd never been particularly interested in fitness, that she bought new clothes, wore makeup on random weekdays, seemed lighter somehow, like she was carrying a secret that made her happy. He wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe she was planning a surprise for him. Maybe she was just enjoying a new phase of life. But late one night in January, when she'd fallen asleep on the couch, her phone buzzed with a message. David glanced at it, not intending to snoop, just looking. The preview on the screen said, "Same place tomorrow? I miss seeing you." No name, just a phone number he didn't recognize. He didn't confront her, not then. Instead, he did something he'd never done in 24 years of marriage. He started checking her phone when she was in the shower. He found deleted messages, but not many, just fragments. "Tonight was wonderful. I can't stop thinking about you. We have to be more careful." His hands shook as he read them. His chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. But he still didn't have proof. Not real proof. Tuesday, March 14th started like any other day. David left for work at 6 in the morning. Rebecca was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. He kissed her forehead like he always did and whispered that he loved her. She didn't respond. At work, David couldn't focus. His crew noticed. Frank, his foreman for 15 years, asked if everything was okay at home. David said it was fine, but Frank knew better. By lunchtime, David had made a decision. He was going to follow Rebecca that night, not to catch her, not to confront her, but to know. To finally, definitively know whether the woman he'd loved for 2.5 decades was lying to him. The not knowing was worse than anything else could be. That evening, Rebecca left the house at 7:15. She told David she had a women's ministry meeting, should be home by 9:30. He waited 15 minutes, then got in his truck and drove toward the church. Her car wasn't there. The parking lot was empty except for Pastor Collins's sedan. David's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He drove through town slowly, checking the grocery store parking lot, the coffee shop, the park where people sometimes walked in the evenings. Nothing. Then, Almost on instinct, he turned toward the Walmart on Route 9. It was the biggest store in the area, open 24 hours, with a massive parking lot that wrapped around the back of the building. And there, tucked away in the far corner behind the loading docks, barely visible from the main road, was Rebecca's white Honda Accord. David's mouth went dry. He pulled into a spot 3 rows back and killed his engine. From where he sat, he could see her car clearly. The windows were fogged up. The engine was running. And as he watched, he saw movement inside. 2 silhouettes. He sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Part of him wanted to drive away, to pretend he'd never seen this, to go home and crawl into bed and let the not knowing protect him from whatever truth was waiting in that car. But his legs moved before his mind could stop them. He opened his truck door. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet parking lot. He walked across the asphalt, each step feeling heavier than the last. He could hear music coming from inside her car, something soft and jazzy, completely unlike the Christian radio she always played. When he got close enough, he could see through a small, clear spot in the fogged window. Rebecca was in the back seat, and she wasn't alone. Pastor Marcus Collins was with her. Not just with her. The scene was unmistakable. David's vision tunneled. Everything around him went silent except for a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He'd carried a handgun in his truck for years. Georgia law allowed it. He'd never thought about it much, just something for protection, for emergencies. He walked back to his truck, opened the glove compartment. The weight of the gun in his hand felt both foreign and inevitable. Security footage later analyzed by investigators showed that David stood outside that car for 22 seconds. His hand was at his side. The gun wasn't raised. He was just standing there, breathing, deciding. What was going through his mind in those seconds? Was he thinking about their wedding day? About every Sunday morning they'd sat together in church? About the life they'd built? Or was his mind completely blank, shut down by a hurt so profound that thought itself became impossible? At the 17-second mark, Rebecca looked up and saw him through the window. Her face went white. She screamed, scrambled to cover herself. Pastor Collins turned, his expression shifting from confusion to horror in an instant. He raised his hands, started to say something. The first shot shattered the rear window. The second came less than a second later. Then silence. Not complete silence. Car alarms were going off. Someone in the store had heard the shots and was screaming, but to David, it was silent. He lowered the gun and walked back to his truck. He didn't run, didn't speed away. He sat in the driver's seat with the gun on the passenger side and called 911. The recording of that call would later be played in court. David's voice was eerily calm. "I need police at the Walmart on Route 9. I just shot my wife and her pastor. I shot 2 people. They're in the back parking lot. I'll be here waiting." The dispatcher asked if anyone was injured. David said, "They're both dead. I made sure." Police arrived in under 4 minutes. They found David sitting in his truck, hands on the steering wheel, gun visible on the seat beside him. He didn't resist, didn't speak. Just let them handcuff him and put him in the back of the patrol car. Officers approached Rebecca's car with weapons drawn, but the scene was already over. Rebecca was slumped in the back seat, a single gunshot wound to the chest. She was gone. Pastor Collins was in the front seat where he'd tried to scramble when he saw the gun. He'd taken a shot to the neck. He was still breathing, barely, and they rushed him to Maplewood Regional Hospital, but he died in the ambulance before they made it. A witness who'd been returning a shopping cart saw the whole thing. She described David as looking like a ghost, like he wasn't even really there. Another witness, a Walmart employee on break, said he heard the shots and ran toward the sound, then saw David just sitting in his truck, staring at nothing. If you're still watching, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's following every twist in this story. Because what came next, what investigators discovered in the days following the shooting, would complicate the narrative in ways no one anticipated. Maplewood, Georgia had never seen anything like this. The town shut down in the way small communities do when tragedy strikes at their core. Riverside Baptist Church canceled services that Sunday for the first time in 30 years. Yellow crime scene tape still fluttered in the Walmart parking lot 4 days after the shooting. Local news trucks from Atlanta filled the streets, interviewing anyone who'd known the Pattersons or Pastor Collins. The story spread nationally within 48 hours. Husband kills wife and pastor after finding them together made headlines everywhere. But what those headlines couldn't capture was the absolute devastation rippling through a community that had trusted these people. Jennifer Collins, the pastor's widow, released a statement through her attorney saying she was shattered beyond words and asking for privacy. She'd known nothing about the affair. Their 3 children flew home immediately, trying to process the impossible reality that their father was not only dead, but had died in circumstances that destroyed everything they'd believed about him. Rebecca's sister Emily spoke to reporters outside her home, mascara streaking her face, saying, "Becca was my best friend. I talked to her every single day. How did I not know? How did I miss this?" The question everyone kept asking was the same one Emily voiced. How did no one know? Detective Sarah Winters led the investigation. She'd been with Maplewood PD for 16 years and had worked exactly 2 homicides before this, both domestic situations, both clear-cut. But this case bothered her from the start, and not just because of the violence. Something about the timeline didn't make sense. She started with Rebecca's phone, which they'd recovered from the car. It had been damaged by the broken glass, but their tech team was able to extract most of the data. What they found was revealing but incomplete. Messages between Rebecca and Pastor Collins going back 14 months. They'd started innocently enough, conversations about church business, upcoming events, scheduling conflicts. But by month 3, the tone had shifted. Compliments became more personal. Prayer requests became confessions of loneliness. By month 6, they were meeting in person. The messages laid it out clearly. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, always at the Walmart parking lot, always between 8:30 and 10 p.m. They chose Walmart because it was busy enough that another car wouldn't stand out, but the back lot was dark and rarely used at night. What struck Detective Winters was how careful they'd been. These weren't reckless people. They deleted messages regularly. They never met anywhere they might be recognized. They kept the affair compartmentalized, separate from their real lives, as if that somehow made it less of a betrayal. But here's where things got complicated. The messages stopped abruptly in mid-January. The last text from Marcus to Rebecca read, "I can't do this anymore. I love my wife. I love my church. This has to end before we destroy everything. Please understand." Rebecca's response, "I know, you're right. It was wrong from the start. I'm sorry for my part in this." And that appeared to be it. No more secret meetings, no more late-night texts. From mid-January to mid-March, their communication returned to purely professional matters regarding church business. So if the affair had ended 2 months earlier, why were they together that night? Detective Winters found the answer in a series of phone calls made the day of the shooting. At 4:17 p.m., Rebecca had called Marcus's cell. The call lasted 2 minutes. At 6:45 p.m. she'd called again, this time 47 seconds. At 7:02 p.m., Marcus had called her back, 3 minutes and 12 seconds. And at 7:38 p.m., one final call from Rebecca to Marcus, 9 minutes. Phone records showed that Marcus had been at home during all of these calls. His wife Jennifer later confirmed he'd seemed agitated that evening, said he needed to go handle something at the church, and left around 7:45. But he hadn't gone to the church, he'd gone to Walmart. Detective Winters interviewed church members, neighbors, anyone who'd seen Rebecca or Marcus in the weeks leading up to the shooting. A woman named Patricia, who sang in the choir with Rebecca, said something that stuck with her. About a week before it happened, Rebecca seemed scared. I asked if everything was okay, and she got really quiet, then said, "I think David knows." I didn't understand what she meant then, but now it makes terrible sense. Another church member said he'd seen David at the hardware store 3 days before the shooting. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in a week. I asked how he was doing, and he just stared at me for a second, then said, "Do you think you ever really know someone?" It was such a strange thing to say. The picture that emerged was of a man slowly unraveling as suspicion turned to certainty. David had been conducting his own investigation for weeks. He'd checked Rebecca's mileage against her explanations of where she'd been. He'd driven past the church on nights she said she was there. He'd found receipts that didn't match her stories, but he'd never confronted her directly. In one of his interviews, David told Detective Winters, "I think part of me hoped I was wrong, that I was being paranoid, that there was some explanation that would make it all make sense. And another part of me knew that once I said it out loud, once I accused her, there was no going back. Our marriage would be over either way." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Rebecca's laptop, which police had seized from the Patterson home as part of the investigation. It had taken months to crack the password, and when they finally did, they found a document that changed everything. It was dated March 13th, 1 day before the shooting. The file was titled simply, "What I Need to Say." It was a draft of a letter Rebecca had been writing to David. Detective Winters read it 3 times before she fully understood what it meant. The letter began, "David, by the time you read this, I hope you'll understand why I had to tell you the truth. I've been carrying a secret that's been eating me alive, and I can't do it anymore. I can't keep lying to you when you've never been anything but good to me." She went on to confess the affair with Marcus. She described how it had started, how they'd both been lonely in different ways, how it had felt like a form of emotional escape that gradually became physical. But then came the part that made Detective Winters sit back in her chair. "I ended it 2 months ago because I realized I was throwing away everything that actually matters for something that was never real. Marcus and I weren't in love. We were 2 people hiding from our real problems, and the guilt was destroying me from the inside. I've been trying to find the courage to tell you, but every time I start, I see the hurt it's going to cause, and I lose my nerve." The letter went on for 3 pages. Rebecca detailed her plans to confess to David, to leave the church, to start counseling, to do whatever it took to try to rebuild trust if he'd let her. At the end, she wrote, "I need you to know that I think you're watching me. I think you suspect. And I'm scared of what will happen when you find out. Not because I think you'd hurt me, that's not who you are, but because I'm scared of losing you forever. I'm scared of the moment when you look at me and don't see your wife anymore." The document was saved, but never sent. The next day, Rebecca would be dead. Detective Winters pulled the phone records again with this new context. The 4 calls between Rebecca and Marcus on March 14th suddenly made sense. She was telling him that she was going to confess to David that night. And Marcus had agreed to meet her, possibly to support her decision, or to discuss how to handle it. What if Rebecca had called Marcus that evening not for a secret meeting, but because she needed support before the hardest conversation of her life? What if Marcus had rushed to Walmart not for an affair, but because Rebecca said she was scared and needed someone to talk to before going home? They brought in a forensic linguist to analyze the text messages and the letter. Her assessment: based on the language patterns and emotional content, I believe Rebecca Patterson was preparing to confess and seek reconciliation. The fear expressed in her letter appears genuine. The timeline supports this interpretation. But there was no way to know for certain what had been said in that car before David arrived. Both people who could confirm or deny the theory were dead. Then came the piece of evidence that truly broke the case open: security footage from Walmart's exterior cameras. The parking lot cameras hadn't captured the actual crime, the angle was wrong, and the back lot was too dark. But a traffic camera on Route 9 positioned to monitor the intersection near the Walmart entrance had captured something investigators initially missed. The footage showed David's truck entering the parking lot at 9:31 p.m., but it also showed something else. At 9:15 p.m., 16 minutes before David arrived, Another vehicle had entered and parked in the same general area. Detectives tracked down the driver, a man named Scott Hammond, a 47-year-old insurance adjuster who worked late hours and often stopped at Walmart on his way home. What he told them was stunning. Scott had been sitting in his car, finishing a phone call with a client, when he'd noticed a white Honda nearby. He'd heard raised voices, a man and a woman arguing. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Distress. The woman was crying. The man kept saying something that sounded like he was trying to calm her down. Scott said he'd sat there for maybe 5 or 6 minutes before going into the store around 9:25 p.m. He'd been inside shopping when he heard the gunshots and the chaos that followed. Now, with the context of Rebecca's letter and the phone records, it painted a completely different picture of what had happened in that parking lot. Rebecca had called Marcus, told him she was going to confess to David. Marcus had come to the parking lot to talk her through it, to offer support, to help her find the words. What David saw through that fogged window might not have been what he thought he was seeing. But in his mind, in that moment of discovery, context didn't matter. He'd been tracking his wife for weeks. He'd been building a case in his head, and when he found her in a car with the pastor in the exact spot where they'd met for their affair, his brain filled in the narrative it had been constructing all along. He never gave them a chance to explain. The trial of David Patterson began on October 4th, 9 months after the shooting. The prosecution maintained its position. This was premeditated murder. David had armed himself, stalked his wife, and executed her and Marcus Collins in cold blood. The defense presented the new evidence, the letter, the witness testimony, the phone records, arguing that David had been operating under extreme emotional disturbance and that his actions, while illegal, were the result of a man who'd been psychologically destroyed by prolonged deception. The testimony was brutal. Forensic experts described the gunshot wounds. Crime scene photos were shown to the jury, and several members looked away. Jennifer Collins took the stand and described the moment police came to her door. They said he'd been shot. They said he was with another woman, and I kept saying, "No, there's been a mistake. Not Marcus. You have the wrong person." But it wasn't wrong. And I had to call our children and tell them their father was gone, and the reason why. Emily, Rebecca's sister, testified about who Rebecca had been. She wasn't a bad person. She made a terrible mistake, but she was trying to make it right. And she never got the chance, because someone decided that their hurt was more important than her life. David's attorney put mental health experts on the stand who testified that David showed all the signs of someone who'd experienced cumulative trauma. Betrayal trauma, especially in the context of a long-term marriage and religious community, can cause a complete break with rational thinking. The brain effectively short-circuits under the weight of emotional pain. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On the 4th day, they came back with a verdict. They found David Patterson guilty of 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter rather than murder. The distinction was crucial. Murder would have meant life without parole. Manslaughter, committed under extreme emotional disturbance, carried a lighter sentence. At the sentencing hearing, David spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. I loved Rebecca more than I knew how to express. And when I saw her that night, all I could see was the end of everything I'd believed in. I thought she was destroying us on purpose, again and again. I didn't know she was trying to fix it. I didn't know she was afraid. I didn't give her the chance to tell me. I just reacted. And I destroyed 3 families because I couldn't see past my own pain for even 30 seconds. I think about those 22 seconds every single day, the seconds I stood there before I pulled the trigger. I think about what might have happened if I'd walked away, if I'd gone home and waited for her, if I'd let her explain. I think about Rebecca being alive, Pastor Collins being alive, their families not being torn apart. But I can't go back. I can only accept what I've done and the consequences that come with it. The judge sentenced David to 40 years, with the possibility of parole after 25. As he was led out of the courtroom, Jennifer Collins made eye contact with him. She didn't look angry. She looked empty, The aftermath rippled through Maplewood for years. Riverside Baptist Church never fully recovered. Attendance dropped by 60% within 6 months. The building was eventually sold to a community theater group. Rebecca's school, Oakwood Elementary, planted a tree in her memory. Her classroom was left empty for a year before the district quietly assigned a new teacher. The Walmart where it happened became a place people avoided. The company eventually remodeled the entire exterior, trying to erase the association. But locals still knew, still remembered. In prison, David became a model inmate. He spent his days in the library, tutoring other prisoners for their GED exams. He attended every counseling session offered. He never appealed his sentence. 5 years after the shooting, something unexpected happened. Emily, Rebecca's sister, started a non-profit organization called Second Chances Family Services. The organization provides free counseling for couples experiencing infidelity and helps families navigate the aftermath of betrayal without resorting to violence. In an interview with a local news station, Emily explained why. "I lost my sister to a moment of rage that could have been prevented if they'd had the tools to communicate. If David had confronted Rebecca, if Rebecca had found the courage to confess sooner. There were so many points where this could have gone differently. I can't bring Becca back, but maybe I can help other families avoid the same ending." David donated the small amount of money he earned from his prison job to the organization. It wasn't much, maybe $20 a month, but it was all he had to give. So what do we take from a story like this? Maybe it's that secrets have weight, that lies compound over time, that the moment you're most afraid to tell the truth is often the moment when truth matters most. Rebecca knew she'd made a terrible mistake. She was trying to make it right. But she waited too long, and in that waiting, David's pain grew into something she couldn't have anticipated. Maybe the lesson is about communication. David suspected for weeks, but never directly confronted Rebecca. He investigated, gathered evidence, but never gave her the chance to explain or confess. He was protecting himself from a conversation that might have saved 3 lives. Or maybe the lesson is simpler and more difficult, that in moments of unbearable pain, we're all capable of actions we'd never believe possible, that the distance between being a good person and doing something unforgivable is shorter than any of us want to admit. That 22 seconds can be the difference between walking away and destroying everything. What's your take on this? Do you think David Patterson deserves eventual release, or should he spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did? Do you think Rebecca and Marcus bear some responsibility for creating the situation that led to their deaths, or is that blaming the victims? And here's maybe the hardest question. If you were in David's position, if you discovered your spouse in that situation, can you honestly say you know how you'd react? That you'd be able to walk away? If this story affected you, if it made you think about trust, betrayal, and the consequences of our worst moments, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you stand on this. And if you found this story as compelling and tragic as I did, hit that subscribe button. We cover true crime stories that go deeper than headlines, that explore the human elements behind the worst decisions people make. Thank you for watching. And remember, the people in these stories were real. Their pain was real. Their families are still living with the consequences.